Hi everybody, it's Dan and welcome back to my kitchen. Today we're going to be whipping up a Sailor Moon inspired cake with the simple chocolate cake recipe, fluffy vanilla buttercream, simple fondant decorations, and all of it's going to come together for one amazing, delicious, nerdy cake. I'll be sure to throw a link to the full recipe down below in the description, along with my tips, tricks, everything you might need to whip this up right in your own kitchen. Plus, while you're down there, don't forget to like, subscribe, click the bell to receive notifications every time I post a new video. Now for our doll cake, we are just gonna have 2 layers, but if you want to split up this doll cake form into 3 layers or 4 layers, definitely feel free to go ahead and do so. But for today, we're gonna go ahead and just use 2 layers. So before we stack them together, we're gonna add a generous helping of this dreamy vanilla buttercream, smooth it out, and add our top layer of cake. Once your cakes have been filled and stacked, it's gonna be time to start our crumb coat. Now our crumb coat is gonna be a very thin layer of frosting used to glue our crumbs down, seal in the cake's moisture, which is going to be super useful if you need to store the cake before decorating, and provide an even base for additional buttercream. It's basically a delicious primer for your cake masterpiece that keeps the cake on the cake side and the frosting on the frosting side. So for our crumb coat, we're going to use an offset spatula and spread a thin layer of frosting over our cake. It should be thin enough that you can see the cake and crumbs through it, and don't worry about any visible crumbs. Just smooth the icing as best as you can and let it dry until it crusts over or feels dry to the touch. And because we are going to be using fondant today, we want to go ahead and make sure that our cake is completely cooled. A hot cake will melt the crumb coat. And we also want to try to do one more layer of frosting over our crumb coat before draping on our fondant. This is really going to help the fondant stick to the cake. Once we have that crumb coat on our doll cake, we're going to go ahead, we're going to grab our fondant and begin to cover. So for this Sailor Jupiter cake, I am going to be using a Kelly green fondant. This way I'm really capturing those core colors of Sailor Jupiter. And what I did was just roll out my fondant and cut out about an 8-inch wide circle. Now usually, because I am using a 6-inch round doll cake form pan, I would cut out a circle that's a little bit wider, but I wanted to make sure that the fondant for our Sailor Jupiter cake was draped enough, this way we can pipe roses underneath our fondant once we are at that point. So when you're ready, just go ahead, bring your fondant over to your cake and gently lay it on top, then smooth it out while shaping it to give the bottom of your cake that kind of that dress motion, as if our Sailor Jupiter cake is going to be jumping right into action. Now when it comes to your fondant, we've used a lot on the channel before, so I'm not going to bore you too much with little clips of me rolling out the fondant. Just keep in mind that your fondant should be about 1/8 inch thick. It is susceptible to tearing and cracking, so it's important to use even pressure and not go too fast. And no worries if you don't get it perfect right away, because we had a nice thin layer of crumb coat. If you feel like it's not perfect or to your liking, just carefully remove it, re-knead your fondant, re-roll it out, and re-drape over your cake until it is just to your liking. Once you're happy with how your fondant is laying on your doll cake, we're going to move on to that next step. Grab your doll and let's get her secured right into her cake. Once we have our doll secured in our cake, let's go ahead and take our fondant and begin to work on the upper half of our doll cake. First up, we're going to take our white fondant. We're going to roll it out lengthwise, and we're going to cut out 2 identical 3 to 4 inch strips and drape them on top of our doll and connect them to the bottom half of our fondant dress. And this way, our next piece of fondant will have something to stick to when we wrap it around the top of our doll. Next, we're going to roll out some white fondant, cut out a hexagon shape, and place that onto the doll's upper half. Now, you want to make sure that this piece covers her top half as well as the fondant that we placed to seal her in. Be sure to remove the excess and close the seam with your handy dandy fondant tool or just your fingertips. No need to make it absolutely perfect, since there is going to be fondant draped from the shoulders as well as a big bow down the back of the gown. With the back out of sight, we still want to work out the shape for the top half of our doll using our fondant tools and hands before we go back in adding some fondant details. We're going to move on to that next step. And that is going to be to cover our fondant with a very, very, very thin layer of piping gel. So grab your piping gel, grab your paintbrush, and let's get going on this fondant. Now, usually I would use water. It is my go-to every time I'm working with fondant and I want to stick things to fondant. But because we are going to be using edible glitter on our cake, I wanted to make sure that the edible glitter actually stuck to the cake. Because the piping gel is not going to harden and weigh down on our fondant, I thought this would be a nice way to test out to make sure that the piping gel holds the edible glitter in place when we move to that step. After that piping gel is on your fondant, grab your edible glitter, grab a paintbrush, and let's get started on getting this cake nice and sparkly. Now, when it comes to actually buying your edible glitter, be sure that you are actually looking at the labels for the type of glitter you want to use on this cake. Most edible glitters and luster dust should state edible on the label. If the label just says non-toxic or for decorative purposes only and does not include an ingredient list, the glitter should not be used directly on foods and should not be consumed at all. If the glitter you'd like to use is edible, it will likely say somewhere on its packaging edible glitter and include a list of ingredients that can commonly include sugar, cornstarch, maybe some color additives. Either way, don't be fooled by products that say non-toxic on the label. Just because it's non-toxic does not mean it's edible. For example, Play-Doh, non-toxic. You're not going to grab a chunk and eat that for breakfast. Luckily, it's pretty easy to figure out what's edible and what's purely aesthetic once you know what to look for. So always be sure to check the label and what's actually marked on the item itself. We're going to grab more fondant and we're going to continue to decorate to really make sure that this is fully Sailor Moon inspired. So gather up your red fondant and roll it out lengthwise. Your red fondant should be rolled out to about a 1/2 inch thickness and rolled out lengthwise. The goal here is to have a 12-inch stretch of fondant. You can go as short as 9 inches and slightly pull as you wrap your cake. Just keep in mind though that this may cause the fondant to tear. Once you're happy with how your red fondant belt looks on your cake, we're going to move on to that next step. So to make our cosmic heart fondant brooch, we're just going to be working with some simple shapes and 2 primary fondant colors, both yellow and red. I'll make sure to have all these directions in the recipe link down below in the description, so be sure to check that out. I go in so much detail on how you can make your own fondant cosmic heart brooch. But once you have all your shapes out and sized and ready to go, grab a tiny bowl of water and a paintbrush to begin putting your fondant cosmic heart brooch together. You'll start by lightly brushing your larger yellow fondant heart with water and place your red fondant heart on top and centered. Then grab your paintbrush again and lightly brush water on top of your red fondant heart and place 3 of your yellow fondant strips on top to form a T shape. This T shape should be ever so slightly off centered. Trim any excess that hangs off the sides of your red fondant heart. Once you're happy with your cosmic heart fondant brooch, just lightly brush the back with water and place on top of your red fondant belt in the center and lined up with your doll cake. We're going to move on to that next step. So roll out some red fondant and cut out 4 bow pieces. I'll make sure to have a template on the blog post with the link down below in the description, so check it out if you're not so good like me freehanding bow pieces. But I like to do 4 pieces because it makes it easier rather than just trying to fold the fondant on top of itself, which is really going to make the fondant heavy and potentially fall off the cake. So with cutting out 4 pieces, I can really control the weight of that fondant on the back and shape it a little more so it looks a lot like fabric. Let's go ahead and take our fondant and begin to decorate from the waist up of our doll. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take some blue fondant first, cut out a swallowtail shape with more of a U-neck and just drape that around my doll's shoulders so the points meet right in the front. Then I'm gonna go ahead, roll out a little bit of red fondant, and following that same method with our big red fondant bow of our cake, I'm just gonna cut out 4 small bow shapes in blue fondant, and this is going to be for the front bow that's going to sit right on top of our doll. And since no one's going to be eating the doll itself, feel free to add a little more sparkle up top with a little tiny press-on gemstone. To wrap up the outfit for our doll cake, we're going to go ahead, take a little bit of red fondant, give our doll a red necklace, and 2 red fondant arm cuffs. Once your cake is fully decorated, that's it, you're done. Pat yourself on the back. You've made your very own Sailor Moon inspired cake that is fit for the Moon Kingdom itself. And this is going to be a part of a huge Sailor Moon cake series. We've done Sailor Moon cakes on the channel before. I had fun. I'm such a big Moony, huge Sailor Moon fan. So I was thinking, sketching up some cake designs. I was like, you know what? Let's do maybe another 24 Sailor Moon inspired cakes. So be sure to head to those comments down below and let me know your favorite Sailor Moon scout so we can go ahead and make sure that she gets their very own cake. And that is a wrap. Thank you so much for hanging out today in my kitchen and checking out this amazing new recipe. Don't forget, if you want even more, like, subscribe, click the bell to receive notifications every time I post a new video. And if you whip this up right at home, don't forget to give a tag on Instagram. You know, let me see what you're baking up in your kitchen. Alrighty, well, I'm gonna grab a slice of this cake, enjoy the day, enjoy the weather. Hope you get to do the same. And as always, I will see you in the next video very, very soon. Bye-bye.